We talked yesterday about the protests that are taking place in Lebanon, which are fundamentally taking on a sickness with neoliberalism and austerity. And it's significant because they're cross-sectarian. And this is journalist Kareem Chayab on Democracy Now! Elaborating on the protests.
Since Thursday night, protests have swept Beirut following a cabinet decision to add further regressive taxes to help balance the Lebanese budget, which is going through which has a massive deficit. News outlets used a WhatsApp tax as sort of the straw that broke the camel's back. What happened that night started with a protest that went around Beirut, but following an incident where the bodyguards of the education minister fired warning shots and dispersing the crowds, we suddenly heard and saw protests across the country erupt like never before, across major cities and towns, and people blocking major highways across the country.
And Kareem Shahab, these protests have occurred not only in Beirut, but in other areas of the country where Hezbollah is the main political and governmental force. I'm wondering, are the protests now spreading throughout the country?
Absolutely. So following the incidents of last Thursday night, we have seen protests across the country, including in areas which are considered key political areas for parties like Hezbollah and their allies Amal, such as Sur, Bint Jbeil, Nabati, and others. This is rather unprecedented, considering that many of them have been critical of both parties, especially Amal, and there's been a bit of nuance on Hezbollah, which I've never seen before in those areas in particular. We have seen some cases of people attacking the signs and offices of MPs belonging to both parties. So this is something that's very unique for Lebanon, because despite Lebanon having a relatively vibrant civil society in the region, especially in Beirut, it remains centric to the capital. But here we are, we're seeing protests across the country calling for, at least the vast majority of people calling for the downfall of the government.
Yeah, and I think that that's actually an interesting thing, even with regards to Hezbollah. Hezbollah, that has that very Sunni kind of justice, Shia justice, not Sunni, Shia justice discourse, has actually been extremely integrated with its own forms of global capital and its own way, its own sort of modes of governance. And they've sort of changed and reflected those broader dynamics in Lebanon. So this movement it's powerful. It's really exciting. We'll see what it yields. And it does parallel Sudan and Iraq.